The small plant sat under the protective field, its leaves gently moving in the air from the lab's ventilation system. Everyone watched as Frost slowly moved toward it. The energy field they had created hummed softly, giving off a faint blue glow similar to Frost's own light. "Remember," Susan said, checking the readings on her screen, "we modeled this field exactly on John's cellular energy pattern. It should work the same way." Frost reached out slowly. The moment her energy form touched the plant, everyone held their breath. The leaves frosted over slightly but didn't freeze solid. After a few seconds, the frost melted away, leaving the plant perfectly healthy. "It worked," Lisa shouted, checking her instruments. The plant cells maintained normal activity even during contact. The celebration was cut short by a loud alarm. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the ship. "Critical failure in primary cooling system," the ship's computer announced. "Backup systems failing. Hull breach detected in Sector 7. The ship shuddered violently. Everyone grabbed onto nearby surfaces to stay standing. "What's happening?" John asked, steadying himself against a table. Lisa rushed to a computer terminal. "The cooling systems are offline. Something damaged the main coolant lines. Without them, the engines will overheat and shut down." "Can we fix it?" Susan asked. Lisa shook her head. "The damage is in a section exposed to space. Even with protective suits, no one could survive the cold out there long enough to make repairs. We're talking about temperatures near absolute zero." The ship shook again. More warning alerts filled the screens. "We have less than 30 minutes before engine failure," Lisa said. "After that, we'll lose power, life support, everything." Frost moved closer to the displays, studying the damage reports. "I could reach the damaged area. The cold of space doesn't affect me." "But you don't have physical hands," Susan said. "You can't operate the repair tools." John stood up straighter, wincing as he moved his injured arms. "I could go with her. With the protective field, I might be able to survive being near her long enough to make the repairs." "That's too dangerous," Susan protested. "The field hasn't been properly tested, and your arms are still damaged from the previous exposures." Another violent shake ran through the ship. More warning lights appeared on the screens. "We don't have a choice," John said. "Everyone on this ship will die if we don't fix those coolant lines. My mutation gives me the best chance of surviving out there." Lisa quickly modified a spacesuit with their protective field technology. "The field should help, but you'll still be dealing with the cold of space, plus Frost's freezing effect. No one has ever survived anything like that." "How long will it take to make the repairs?" John asked, letting the medical team remove his bandages. 10 minutes, maybe 15, Lisa said. "But that's assuming everything goes perfectly." Frost's form brightened. "I can help guide the repairs. I've learned much about your technology while watching your work." The ship's captain spoke over the intercom, ordering all non-essential personnel to the escape pods. The situation was becoming desperate. John started putting on the modified spacesuit. Every movement hurt his frost-damaged arms, but he forced himself to continue. "If this works, we might not only save the ship but prove that humans and energy beings can work together." Susan helped him with the final suit checks. "The field should protect you from the worst effects, but you'll still feel the cold. At the first sign of serious trouble, you come back in." "Understood." "The frozen crew members are counting on us," John said, looking at the ice statues of his friends. "We have to try." As the airlock door closed behind John and Frost, everyone in the lab held their breath. They were about to find out if human adaptability and determination could overcome the impossible once again. The second contact test left John shivering on the medical bed. Both his arms now showed signs of frostbite, but he was still alive and conscious. Susan and Lisa studied the new data while medical staff treated his injuries. "Your body temperature dropped to near freezing this time," Susan said, showing him the readings. "But your cells kept fighting back. They never completely stopped moving." Lisa pointed to another screen showing microscope images. Look at his cell structure. The mitochondria are different from normal human cells. They're producing almost twice the usual amount of energy. Frost moved closer to the screens, careful to keep her distance from the humans. In my time, we encountered many species. All of them froze instantly. None showed this ability to resist. The ship's genetic database revealed something unexpected. John's mutation wasn't as rare as they first thought. About 1 in every 1,000 humans had some version of it. Most never knew they were different, aside from feeling too warm sometimes or having higher than normal body temperature. It's like humans evolved this trait by accident, Susan said, reviewing the genetic data. The mutation first appeared thousands of years ago, but no one knew what it was really capable of. John sat up slowly, wrapping a thermal blanket around his shoulders. So there are others like me. Other humans who might survive contact. Theoretically, yes, Lisa answered. But the mutation appears in different strengths. Some might have better resistance than you. Others might have less. The next few hours were filled with testing and analysis. They found 3 more crew members with similar mutations, though none as strong as John's. Each person's cells showed the same increased energy production, though at different levels. There's something else, Susan said, looking up from her computer. The genetic markers for this mutation. They're becoming more common in the human population. The number of people born with it has been increasing over the last few centuries. Frost's form brightened with interest. Your species is adapting, evolving. But why? You never encountered my kind before. Lisa walked over with a new set of data. Maybe we did, just not your exact species. The universe is full of extreme cold. Maybe humans who could handle very cold conditions survived better, passed on their genes. Like a backup system we never knew we had, John added, flexing his damaged fingers. Our bodies prepared for something without knowing exactly what it was preparing for. The ship's doctor came in with more test results. The news wasn't all good. Even with his resistance, John's repeated exposure was causing lasting damage. His body could fight the freezing effect, but it came at a cost. We need to think bigger, Susan said, spreading out all their research. John's mutation proves it's possible to resist the freezing. Now we need to find a way to protect everyone else, and hopefully save those already frozen. Lisa held up a sample of ship's plasma. If we can copy how this plasma resists the cold and combine it with what we learned from John's cells. You want to try to copy my mutation? John asked. Is that even possible? Susan shook her head. Not exactly. But we might be able to create a field that mimics your cell's energy pattern, something that could protect against the freezing effect. Frost moved to the window, looking at her frozen victims in the other room. If you succeed, you might also find a way to safely thaw them. My people never found a solution, but we never met a species like yours before. The implications were huge. If they could understand and copy this human adaptation, it might not just save the frozen crew members. It could open up new possibilities for human survival in extreme conditions throughout space. John stood up, still shaky but determined. Whatever you need from me to make this work, I'm in. Those are our people in there. And maybe this is why humans evolved this trait, to help us face challenges like this. The void of space stretched out before John as he moved carefully along the ship's hull. Frost glided beside him, her energy form unaffected by the vacuum. The protective field around his suit gave off a soft blue glow, mixing with Frost's natural light to create an ethereal scene against the backdrop of stars. The damage is just ahead, Frost said, pointing to a section of the hull where the metal had buckled. The coolant lines were clearly visible, torn apart by whatever had hit the ship. John's hands shook as he reached for his repair kit. The cold was intense, even through the protective field and suit. Every movement sent pain through his frost-damaged arms. Your vital signs are dropping. Susan's voice came through his helmet comm. Body temperature down to 34 degrees Celsius. Can't worry about that now, John said through chattering teeth. He pulled out the repair tools and began working on the damaged lines. Frost moved closer, using her energy form to illuminate the work area. The field is holding, but I can sense it weakening. Your cellular activity is slowing. Inside the ship, Susan and Lisa watched the readings with growing concern. The protective field was drawing massive power, and John's body was struggling to maintain its heat. Your core temperature is still dropping, Susan warned. You have maybe 5 minutes before hypothermia becomes critical. John's fingers felt numb as he worked to seal the first coolant line. Even with Frost trying to minimize her freezing effect, the combined cold of space and her presence was overwhelming the protective field. 2 more lines to go, he said, his voice weak. How's the ship holding up? Engine temperature still rising, Lisa replied. We need all 3 lines repaired in the next 8 minutes, or we lose containment. The second line was harder. John's movements were becoming sluggish, and ice crystals were forming on his visor despite the protective field. John, Frost said suddenly, your cellular activity, it's changing, like what happened to the others before they froze. Have to keep going, he mumbled, fighting to stay focused. The third line was right in front of him, but his vision was blurring. Then something unexpected happened. Where Frost's energy field touched the protective barrier around him, new patterns began to form. The 2 fields weren't fighting each other anymore. They were synchronizing. The readings are changing. Lisa's excited voice came through the comm. The 2 fields are matching frequencies. They're amplifying each other. John felt warmth returning to his limbs. The ice on his visor melted away. Somehow, the combination of his natural resistance, the protective field, and Frost's energy had found a perfect balance. Quick, finish the repairs, Susan urged. The engine can't take much more. With renewed strength, John completed the final seal. The coolant immediately began flowing, and the ship's warning alarms fell silent. Engine temperature dropping, Lisa reported. We did it. But they had achieved more than just saving the ship. The synchronized fields had shown them something crucial about how energy beings and physical matter could coexist. Back inside the ship, the research team quickly modified their protective field based on what they had learned. Within hours, they had created a stable version that would let Frost interact safely with physical objects and people. The first test came when they used the new field to safely thaw the frozen crew members. One by one, they were revived, confused but unharmed by their experience. Ben, the first victim of Frost's touch, summed it up best after he recovered. So it took a human being too stubborn to freeze, and an energy being too determined to give up to solve a problem that 2 advanced civilizations couldn't figure out. Frost's form glowed brightly as she replied, Perhaps that's why my people left the artifact where humans would find it. Something in your species' constant adaptation, your ability to survive against all odds, made you the perfect ones to solve this puzzle. John smiled, his formerly frost-damaged arms now fully healed. Or maybe we just proved that the impossible becomes possible when different species work together instead of hiding from each other. The Starweaver's encounter with Frost became the first chapter in a new era of human energy being cooperation. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, an ancient race of energy beings learned that they no longer had to live in isolation, thanks to humanity's unique gift for defying the impossible. As the Starweaver's research team worked on their protection field, Frost began sharing more about her past. She hovered near the lab's main display screen, her energy form casting a soft blue glow over the room. My people were not always energy beings, she said, while Susan and Lisa worked on their calculations. We evolved from physical creatures, much like you. But our world was dying, growing colder each year. John sat nearby, his frost-damaged arms wrapped in healing bandages. So you changed to survive. Yes. Over many generations, our bodies learned to convert physical matter into pure energy. It let us survive as our planet froze. But it came with a terrible price. Frost's form dimmed slightly. We could no longer touch anything living without freezing it. Susan looked up from her work. Is that why your people went into isolation? We had no choice, Frost replied. At first, we tried to find ways to control our freezing effect. Many species died before we realized we couldn't change what we had become. So we sealed ourselves away in artificial worlds, studying the universe from a distance. Lisa walked over with new test results. But you were different, weren't you? You stayed in that artifact instead of going with them. Frost's energy pattern swirled faster. I volunteered for an experiment. Our scientists believe that somewhere in the universe, there must be species who could survive our touch. I agreed to be preserved, waiting to be found by such beings. And now you have, John said, managing a smile despite his pain. The lab door opened as more research team members arrived with equipment. They were testing different energy fields, trying to copy the protective effect of John's cellular mutation. So far, nothing had worked perfectly, but they were getting closer. The thing I don't understand, Susan said, reviewing their latest results, is why the artifact was in that abandoned space station. Did your people leave it there? Frost moved closer to the artifact that had contained her. No. The station belongs to another species we encountered long ago. They were working on their own solution to our problem, but they never finished. Something made them leave in a hurry. What kind of solution? Lisa asked, looking up from her work. They believed they could create a field that would let physical matter and energy beings exist together safely. But all their tests failed. Frost paused, her form flickering. Many died in those experiments. John stood up carefully. But they were on the right track, weren't they? That's basically what we're trying to do now. Susan nodded, pulling up more data on her screen. And we have something they didn't. Living proof that it's possible. Your cells, John, and the others with the mutation. You've shown us it can work. Lisa suddenly called everyone over to her station. Look at this. I think I found something in the station's old data files. They were trying to create a field that would speed up molecular motion to counter the freezing effect. That's almost the opposite of what we need, Susan said, studying the files. We don't need to speed up molecules. We need to maintain their normal motion, like John's cells do. Frost moved to examine the data. The station's scientists were close, but they were approaching it wrong. They tried to fight against our freezing power instead of working with it. The pieces were starting to come together. John's mutation didn't actually fight against Frost's freezing effect. It just maintained enough normal cellular activity to prevent complete freezing. If they could copy that effect, we need to test something, Susan said, quickly adjusting their equipment. Frost, would you be willing to try an experiment? We think we might have found a way to let you touch things without freezing them. Frost's form brightened. After all these years, yes, I want to try. The lab grew quiet as Susan set up the test. They would start small, with just a simple plant. If it worked, they might have found the answer not just to saving their frozen crew members, but to helping an entire species reconnect with the physical world. John Martinez sat on the examination table in the quarantine lab as Dr. Susan Miller studied his arm. The skin was pale and covered in frost patterns, but it wasn't frozen solid like the others. His fingers could still move, though they felt stiff and cold. It hurts like hell, John said, watching as Susan took another scan. But I'm alive. That's more than I can say for the others who touched her. Frost hovered nearby, keeping a safe distance, but watching with clear interest. Her blue-white form had brightened considerably since they discovered John's partial immunity. Your thermal readings are unusual, Susan said, comparing the results on her screen. Your body temperature is naturally higher than normal, and it's not just from a fever or infection. Lisa Clark entered the lab, carrying a thick folder of test results. I think I know why, she said, spreading the papers on a nearby table. I checked John's medical history. He has a rare genetic mutation that makes his cells produce more heat than normal. The 3 humans and 1 energy being looked at the medical data. John's mutation had been noted in his file, but never considered important before. In normal situations, it just meant he felt too warm sometimes and had trouble in hot weather. The extra heat his cells produce, Susan said, thinking out loud, it must give them just enough energy to resist your freezing effect. Frost. Not completely, but enough to survive brief contact. Frost moved slightly closer, her energy field making the air shimmer. In all my years of existence, I have never encountered beings quite like humans. Your genetic diversity is remarkable. John flexed his damaged arm, wincing. So what does this mean? Can we use this somehow to help the others? Susan began typing rapidly on her computer. If we can understand exactly how your cells resist the freezing, we might be able to find a way to protect others. Or even better, we might find a way to safely thaw those who are already frozen. The next few hours were filled with careful tests. They took samples of John's tissue, studied his DNA, and measured his body's heat production. Lisa worked on comparing his cell's energy signature to the plasma that had shown resistance to Frost's effect. Look at this, Lisa said, pointing to a complex graph on her screen. The energy pattern from John's cells matches the plasma's harmonic frequency. It's creating a kind of thermal barrier. Susan nodded excitedly. That's why the freezing only affected his outer layers. His cells kept producing enough heat to maintain their molecular motion. Frost watched the proceedings with growing hope. Among my people, there were legends of species who could withstand our touch. We never had the chance to study them properly before we had to isolate ourselves. John sat quietly for a moment, then spoke up. We need to test it again. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Are you sure? Susan asked, concern clear in her voice. The first exposure did significant damage to your arm. John stood up, his expression determined. We need to know if it was a fluke or if I can consistently survive contact. We need more data if we're going to help the others. Frost's form flickered with worry. I don't want to cause you more pain. Sometimes pain is worth it, John said, stepping closer to the energy being. Those are my friends frozen in there. If my weird genes can help us find a way to save them, I'm willing to risk it. Susan quickly set up monitoring equipment while Lisa prepared emergency medical gear, just in case. The room fell silent as John reached out toward Frost's glowing form. The moment of contact sent frost spreading across his skin again. John gritted his teeth, but kept his hand steady, as the sensors recorded everything. His cells were fighting back against the freezing effect, locked in a battle between Frost's molecular stopping power and his own heat-producing mutation. They were about to learn if humanity's genetic quirks could really defy death itself. The news of Ben's freezing spread through the Starweaver like wildfire. Within hours, the research lab had been sealed off, with only essential personnel allowed inside. Dr. Susan Miller watched through the observation window as another frozen crew member was carefully moved into the containment area. Lisa Clark, the ship's lead engineer, shook her head as she reviewed the sensor data. 3 more in the last 6 hours. Even with all our precautions, people keep getting caught by accident. The latest victim had been a young maintenance worker who hadn't noticed frost passing through a wall. 1 moment of contact was all it took. Now there were 4 human ice statues in the lab, each perfectly preserved but completely frozen. It's not her fault, Susan said, watching Frost hover in the corner of the lab. The energy being had grown dimmer with each accident, her bright blue color fading to a pale, washed-out shade. She can't control how her energy field affects organic matter. Lisa pointed to her tablet screen. Look at these readings. When she touches someone, their molecular motion almost completely stops. It's like their atoms forget how to move. The ship's captain had ordered everyone to wear thermal protection suits, but they proved useless. Frost's touch went right through any protective gear, freezing flesh instantly. The only solution seemed to be keeping her isolated, but even that wasn't foolproof. She could pass through most materials without meaning to. I should return to the artifact, Frost said, her voice heavy with sadness. Each moment I remain free brings more risk to your crew. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared through the ship. Emergency in Medical Bay 2, the computer announced. Containment breach detected. Susan and Lisa rushed to the medical bay, their hearts pounding. Through the window, they saw Dr. Peter Wright frozen mid-step, his hand reaching for a medical scanner. Frost hovered nearby, her form flickering with distress. He was trying to help, she said. He thought he had found a way to reverse the freezing. I tried to tell him it was too dangerous, but he insisted on taking readings directly from my energy field. Lisa started running calculations on her tablet. At this rate, we'll lose the whole crew within days. Even if we manage to avoid direct contact, her energy signature is affecting the ship's temperature. The whole vessel is getting colder. The situation was growing desperate. They had 5 frozen crew members who might never be revived, and a being who could freeze more with the slightest touch. The ship's temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the last hour alone. Susan watched as security teams in thermal suits carefully moved Dr. Wright's frozen form to join the others. Each frozen crew member was perfectly preserved, like statues in a bizarre museum. Their faces showed varying expressions of surprise, fear, or determination, captured in the instant of freezing. There has to be a solution, Susan said, reviewing Frost's earlier explanation about her people. Your kind must have found ways to interact with other species before. Frost's form brightened slightly. There were some who could withstand our touch, though very few. Beings with unusual thermal properties or unique cellular structures. Lisa looked up from her calculations. Wait. That might explain the anomaly in the engine room data. When Frost passed near the plasma conduits, their temperature barely dropped. Something about the plasma's energy signature seemed to resist her freezing effect. Susan felt a spark of hope. If they could understand why the plasma wasn't affected, maybe they could find a way to protect the crew. But studying the interaction would be incredibly dangerous. One wrong move could freeze anyone involved. Just then, Security Officer John Martinez's voice came over the comm. Dr. Miller, you need to see this. I was reviewing the camera footage from the last incident, and I noticed something strange. When Frost passed through my arm earlier, it got really cold, but I didn't freeze. Not completely. Susan and Lisa looked at each other, their eyes wide. Could they have just stumbled upon their first real breakthrough? The deep space research vessel Starweaver drifted silently through the darkness of space. Inside the ship's main research lab, Dr. Susan Miller stared at her computer screen, her eyes heavy after 18 hours of continuous work. The abandoned space station they had found 2 days ago held more mysteries than anyone had expected. Dr. Miller, you need to see this, called Jack, one of her junior researchers. His voice carried an unusual edge that made Susan look up immediately. She walked over to his workstation, where a strange artifact sat under the analysis chamber. It was about the size of a basketball, with smooth metallic surfaces that seemed to shift colors in the light. But what caught her attention wasn't the artifact itself. It was the energy readings coming from it. These patterns, she said, leaning closer to the screen. They're organized. Too organized to be random. The artifact had been found in what they assumed was the station's research section, sealed away in a heavily shielded container. Susan had spent hours getting approval to bring it aboard, convincing the ship's captain that it was safe enough to study. As she adjusted the scanner settings, a soft hum filled the room. The artifact's surface began to pulse with a pale blue light. Everyone, step back, Susan ordered, but her warning came too late. The artifact split open like a flower blooming in spring. The brilliant flash of light filled the lab, momentarily blinding everyone present. When Susan's vision cleared, she gasped. Floating above the artifact was a figure made entirely of light and energy. It was roughly humanoid in shape and clearly female in form, its body composed of swirling patterns of blue and white energy. The being's hair flowed as if underwater, made of streams of lighter energy that danced around her head. "Hello," the being said, her voice like chimes in a gentle breeze. "I am called Frost." The lab erupted in excited chatter. First contact with a new life form was what every deep space researcher dreamed of. Susan stepped forward, her heart racing with both excitement and caution. "I'm Dr. Susan Miller," she said. "You're aboard our research vessel, the Starweaver." Frost looked around the lab with evident curiosity. "Your facility is much different from my old home. How long was I in stasis?" Before Susan could answer, one of the lab technicians, Ben, moved closer to get a better look at their visitor. He reached out, perhaps to scan her with his handheld device. "Please, don't." Frost started to warn, but Ben's hand passed through her energy field. The effect was instant and horrifying. Where Ben's hand touched the energy, his flesh turned white. The pale color spread rapidly up his arm and across his body. Within seconds, his entire form was covered in a layer of frost. His expression froze in surprise as his body turned to ice, becoming a human statue. "No, no, no," Frost's voice filled with distress. "I tried to warn him. I'm so sorry." The lab burst into chaos. Security alarms blared as people scrambled away from both Ben's frozen form and the energy being. Dr. Peter Wright, the ship's medical officer, rushed in with his team, having been notified by the lab's emergency protocols. "Nobody touch him," Dr. Wright ordered as he scanned Ben's frozen form. His face grew more concerned with each reading. "He's frozen solid at the molecular level. Every cell. It's like they've been flash frozen to nearly absolute zero." Susan stayed where she was, her mind racing. This was beyond anything in their first contact protocols. They had a crew member turn to ice and an apparently remorseful energy being who could freeze people with a touch. "I never meant to harm anyone," Frost said, her form dimming slightly. "My touch, it is deadly to most organic life forms. It is why my people chose isolation, why I was preserved in the artifact." Dr. Wright looked up from his scans. "He's not dead. Not exactly. The freezing happened so fast that there's no cellular damage. But we have no way to safely thaw him without destroying his cells." Susan looked at Frost, then at Ben's frozen form, then at her frightened colleagues. Their routine research mission had just become something far more complex and dangerous. They had to find a way to handle this situation before anyone else got hurt, but they couldn't just abandon Frost or Ben. "Tell us everything you can about your people," Susan said to Frost. "The more we understand, the better chance we have of helping Ben and keeping everyone safe."